There's one more thing that we want to add to our mini Express client to our Express server, and that is the ability to add a new student to the list. So we have our Express server running on port 3009, and if we have a look over here, the client we've created so far, we are listing the students. We can create a random group of students by clicking the Create Group button, and that's what we implemented in the last video. So now what we want to do is we want to implement handling for this text field and add student button, which is in a form. Let's have a look at the index.html. We can see that we've got a form here, and it has an it has an ID of add student form, and we're going to add a listener to that just so that we have a hold of the text field in the form. So we'll add a submit listener. So let's do that. Add student form. So we will have a function that gets called by this event listener, event handler function. We'll call it handle add student, and it will be passed an event. And then let's just add an event listener. So document get element by ID, add student form, double check that's what it's called, that's what it is. And we'll add event listener on submit this time and not click. And we'll call our handle add student callback function. Now in this function, because we are handling a submit event, we need to prevent default, which is for the page to reload. So let's handle event prevent default. And from the event, we need to get the student name. So we can do that by getting the form, which we can do with event target. Then we want to get the elements of the form, and the text input is the 0th element of that form. So we'll get the 0th element, and what we want from that is the value. So that's what's written in the text field. So I'm going to store this in a variable called student. So that is our student name that gets typed into the field. So if we type John into the field, then that is what's going to be stored in the form elements 0th element dot value. So we have the student. Now we need a function. Let's just make sure that we got that. I like to do that sometimes. So let's console log. We'll inspect here so we can see the console output. And let's just add a name here. Add student. And make sure we get the name. So there it is. We got the name, so that's working. All right, so we need a function that calls our API. So we have a get students function and a get group function that both call our get APIs now. Let's add an add student function that takes in a student name that we're going to add. Now here we're also going to do a fetch. And we're going to do a fetch like we did for get students on URL/students. But this time we need to pass some options because we're not just doing a get this time. So we need to pass a method, which in this case is post. And we also, just like when we call send a post request from Postman or some other client, we need to set the content type header to let it, because we're going to send a body. So it's headers, not header. I've made the mistake of typing header before and then spending hours trying to debug why my post wasn't sending the way that I thought it should. So it's headers, and that's another object. And what we're going to put in that object, the only thing we really need is content type. And we'll set the content type to application JSON. And then of course we need to send a body. Now if you think about what we would type into Postman when we're testing this post, we would have to pass in an object with name, colon, and then the student name, which we're passing into this function. So when this fetch completes, we don't really need to do anything with the response. We could. Our API sends back the updated array of students at the moment, so we could handle the response, but we don't really need to do anything with it. So I'm just going to log that we got a response. And I'm going to do some some error handling as well. And that should be okay. So now from our handle add student, let's see if that's working the way we expect it to. So let's call our add student with student. Now we'll keep an eye over here in the terminal session on our server, and let's try adding John. So we add student, and we got an exception. So, let's see, can you work out what's wrong here? So we have a problem with JSON parse. There's something I forgot to do, sending this request to my server. Can anybody guess what it is? Maybe you guessed. What we need to do is we need to stringify this body. We can't send the object over as it is. If you remember in Postman, we would actually send it in quotes. But what we're going to do, just to make sure that it goes across the way we want, is we're going to call JSON stringify on this body. Now our server is up and running, so let's have a look and see if that fixed the problem. So let's type in John, add student, and there we go. We can see that John was added on our server. John's been added to the list of students, and if we refresh our client over here, we can see that John's been added to the list. Now we don't really, there's a couple of things we want to handle. One is that when we type a name in and hit add student, yes, we're adding the student, we're not clearing the text field, and we're not updating the student list in our client, and we really want to do that. So let's refresh our screen here, and let's go add that handling to our client. So in handle add student, we want to add the student. We also want to clear out the text field. So since we want another handle on this text field, this is when I make a choice to store an intermediate value in a variable, because we're going to need to do event target element 0.value equals null, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this slightly. I'm going to refactor this code slightly, and I am going to store this. I'm going to store an intermediate value for the text field. So I'm going to take value off of here, and I'm going to say let text field, you can call it input field, whatever you want, equal. So I'm just grabbing that input field into a variable, and then I can say student is text field value, and that is going to allow me to use that same variable. I'll take out this console log. I'm going to be able to use that same variable text field value equals null, and that's going to allow me to empty out that text field. So let's just check that that works. So if I add Sue and I add student, now the text field gets cleared, Sue gets added to the list I can see on my server. Now we just need to update the student list, and we've got a nice convenient function to do that called add student to list. Isn't that nice? So all we need to do now is call our add student to list with the student name and the div that we want to add it to, which is student list in this case. So let's add it to student list. Now let's just check that everything is working. So if we add Oscar to the list, add student, now we got Oscar added to the list. We see it's been updated on the server, and our text field has been cleared. There you go. There's our implementation of post from our simple client to our Express server.